When 20-year-old Elvis Presley walked into the offices of Hank Snow Attractions in August 1955, he was nervous, excited, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Standing across the room was a man in an expensive suit, chomping on a cigar, watching Elvis with the cold, calculating eyes of a carnival hustler sizing up his next mark. Colonel Tom Parker, though he was neither a colonel nor named Tom Parker, smiled and extended his hand. "Son, I'm going to make you the biggest star the world has ever seen," he said. And Elvis, desperate for success, desperate to prove his mama right about him being special, shook that hand. In that moment, he signed away his future, his freedom, and ultimately his life. Because the contract Elvis would sign wasn't just a business deal, it was a pact with the devil. And by the time Elvis realized what he'd done, it was already too late to escape. August 1955, Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Aaron Presley was 20 years old and on the verge of something big. He'd recorded "That's All Right" at Sun Studio the year before, and the response had been electric. Kids were going crazy for this new sound, this fusion of black rhythm and blues with white country music that nobody had a name for yet. Elvis was playing every honky-tonk high school gym and radio station that would have him, driving himself and his guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black in a beat-up car from gig to gig. He had a local following, some regional success, but he wasn't a star. Not yet. He was making maybe $50 a show. Good money for a kid who'd grown up in a two-room shack, but nowhere near enough to support his parents, to buy his mama that house he'd promised her, to become the kind of success that would justify all her faith in him. Elvis's current manager was a man named Bob Neal, a local DJ who'd taken Elvis under his wing. Neal was a good guy, honest, well-meaning, genuinely cared about Elvis. But he didn't have the connections, the ruthlessness, or the vision to take Elvis to the next level. And Elvis knew it. He was hungry, desperate even. He wanted success so badly he could taste it, and that desperation made him vulnerable. Enter Colonel Tom Parker. Tom Parker wasn't his real name. He was born Andreas van Kuijk in the Netherlands in 1909. He'd immigrated to America illegally in his late teens, working various jobs: carnival barker, dog catcher, promoter, always hustling, always running some kind of angle. At some point, he'd reinvented himself as Colonel Tom Parker, a Southern gentleman with an honorary title from the governor of Louisiana. The persona was completely fake, but Parker sold it so well that people believed it. That's what made him dangerous. He could sell anything to anyone. By 1955, Parker had made a name for himself managing country music stars. His biggest client was Hank Snow, a popular country singer with a successful touring show. Parker had a reputation as a brilliant promoter, a man who could pack venues, generate publicity, and, most importantly, make money. But he also had a reputation as a shark. Other managers warned their clients to stay away from him. "He'll bleed you dry," they'd say. But Parker didn't care what they said. He just kept smiling, chomping that cigar, and counting his money. Parker had been watching Elvis for months. He'd seen the kid perform, seen the way teenage girls screamed and cried, seen the raw sexual energy that exploded whenever Elvis moved on stage. And Parker had recognized something that nobody else quite understood yet. Elvis Presley wasn't just a singer. He was a phenomenon, a goldmine, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get rich beyond imagination. But Parker was patient. He didn't approach Elvis directly at first. Instead, he started pulling strings behind the scenes. He befriended Bob Neal, Elvis's manager, offering to help book bigger shows, to use his connections in the industry. He positioned himself as a mentor, a helpful colleague, all while slowly, methodically working to push Neal out and take control of Elvis himself. The meeting in August 1955 was carefully orchestrated. Parker invited Elvis and his parents, Vernon and Gladys, to the offices of Hank Snow Attractions. On the surface, it was just a friendly meeting. A chance for Parker to introduce himself properly, to discuss potential opportunities. But Parker had a gift for reading people, and within minutes of meeting Elvis and his parents, he knew exactly how to manipulate each of them. He saw Elvis's hunger, his desperation to succeed, his fear that maybe this moment would pass and he'd end up driving trucks for the rest of his life like his father had done. He saw Vernon's greed, the way his eyes lit up when Parker mentioned the kind of money Elvis could make. And most importantly, he saw Gladys's protective instinct, her fear that her boy would be taken advantage of, her need to believe that someone powerful and capable was looking out for her son. Parker played them all perfectly. "Son," Parker said, leaning back in his chair, cigar smoke curling around his head like a halo. "You've got something special, something I've never seen before. You could be bigger than Hank Snow, bigger than any country singer. Hell, you could be bigger than Frank Sinatra. But you need the right guidance. You need someone who knows how this business works, someone who can protect you from the vultures who will try to take advantage of you." Elvis leaned forward, hanging on every word. Vernon was nodding along, already calculating the potential income. Only Gladys seemed hesitant, something in her gut warning her that this man with the expensive suit and the calculating smile might not have her boy's best interests at heart. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Parker?" Gladys asked, her voice cautious. Parker smiled, the kind of smile a snake might give a mouse. "I'm proposing that I take over as Elvis's exclusive manager. I'll handle everything, bookings, publicity, negotiations, all of it. I'll make Elvis a star, not just a regional act, but a national phenomenon. I'll get him on national television, get him a major record deal, make him the biggest thing in show business." "And what do you want in return?" Gladys pressed. "My standard fee," Parker said smoothly. 50% of everything Elvis earns." The room went silent. 50%. Half of everything. It was an outrageous number. Most managers took 10, maybe 15%. 50% wasn't a management fee. It was robbery. But here's what nobody knew yet, and what would make this deal so devastating in the years to come. Parker wasn't just asking for 50% of Elvis's earnings. He was asking for 50% of Elvis himself, his identity, his freedom, his soul. "That seems awfully high," Vernon said slowly, though you could tell he was already being won over. The idea of Elvis being a national star was too tempting, too intoxicating. "It is high," Parker agreed, not even trying to deny it. "But you get what you pay for in this business. I'm not some two-bit manager who'll book you in county fairs and take his cut. I'm the best there is. I have connections at RCA Records, at the major television networks, in Hollywood. I can open doors that are closed to everyone else. And I work for my money. While other managers sit back and collect their percentage, I'll be out there every day, hustling, promoting, building the Elvis Presley brand into something that will last for decades." He paused, letting that sink in. "But if you think you can get there with Bob Neal, that's fine. He's a good man. You'll do fine playing high school gyms in Mississippi for the rest of your life. But if you want to be a star, a real star, you need me. And I don't come cheap." Elvis looked at his parents. Vernon was nodding, already sold. Gladys was frowning, still hesitant. But Elvis had already made up his mind. He wanted this. He needed this. The idea of staying small, of never making it big, of letting his mama down, it was unbearable. "I'll do it," Elvis said. "Where do I sign?" Gladys put her hand on Elvis's arm. "Baby, maybe we should think about this. 50% is—" "It's what it costs to be somebody, Mama," Elvis interrupted gently. "And I'm going to be somebody. I promised you that, remember? I'm going to buy you that big house. I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to show the world that we're not just poor folks from Tupelo who don't matter. And Mr. Parker's going to help me do that." Gladys wanted to argue, wanted to protect her boy from this man who made her skin crawl. But she saw the determination in Elvis's eyes, saw how badly he wanted this, and she didn't have the heart to stand in his way. So she nodded reluctantly and watched as her son signed away his future to a man who would control him, exploit him, and ultimately contribute to his destruction. But wait, you haven't seen the biggest shock yet, because the 50% was just the beginning. Parker had plans for Elvis that went far beyond a standard management contract. Over the next few months, Parker systematically pushed Bob Neal out of the picture. He started small, taking over booking decisions, negotiating directly with promoters, handling publicity. Neal, being a decent guy who genuinely cared about Elvis, stepped aside gracefully, thinking he was helping. By November 1955, Parker had effectively replaced Neal as Elvis's manager, though the official contract wouldn't be signed until March 1956. During this transition period, Parker worked his magic. He negotiated a deal with RCA Records that bought out Elvis's contract with Sun Records for $35,000, an astronomical sum at the time. He booked Elvis on national television shows. He got him a movie deal with Paramount Pictures. He made Elvis a household name seemingly overnight. And Elvis, watching all this happen, thought he'd made the right choice. Look at what Parker was accomplishing. Look at how fast his career was growing. The 50% seemed like a bargain now. He was making more money than he'd ever dreamed of, even giving half away to Parker. But here's what Elvis didn't understand, what he wouldn't understand until it was too late. Parker wasn't working for him. Parker was working for Parker. Every decision, every deal, every move was calculated to maximize Parker's profit, not Elvis's career or happiness or artistic fulfillment. Take the movie deal. Elvis wanted to be a serious actor. He'd grown up watching James Dean and Marlon Brando, dreaming of being that kind of performer. Someone who could really act, who could take on challenging roles and be respected as an artist. But Parker didn't care about Elvis's artistic ambitions. Parker cared about money. So he steered Elvis into mindless musical comedies, formulaic films that required no acting, no risk, just Elvis singing a few songs and kissing a pretty girl. They were cheap to make, easy to sell, and incredibly profitable. For Parker, Elvis hated those movies. He knew they were garbage. He'd read scripts for serious dramatic films, offers to work with respected directors, to play complex characters, and he'd beg Parker to let him take those roles. But Parker would always say no. These musical pictures make money, Elvis. Why mess with a formula that works? What Parker didn't tell Elvis was that he'd structured the movie deals to maximize his own percentage. Through creative accounting and side deals, Parker was often taking more than 50% from the film work, sometimes as much as 70 or 80%. And Elvis, trusting Parker, never questioned it, never asked to see the full financial records, never realized he was being systematically robbed by the man who claimed to be looking out for him. Hold on. Don't miss this crucial detail. Because Parker's control went far beyond just finances. He controlled every aspect of Elvis's career and, eventually, his life. Parker decided what songs Elvis would record, what television shows he'd appear on, what endorsement deals he'd accept, who would be in his inner circle and who would be kept at a distance. Parker even influenced Elvis's personal life, his relationships, his friendships, his marriage to Priscilla. When Priscilla wanted Elvis to slow down, to spend more time with their daughter Lisa Marie, Parker would undermine her, telling Elvis that his fans needed him, that taking time off was selfish, that real stars worked through their personal problems. Elvis wasn't allowed to tour internationally, ever. You know why? Because Parker was an illegal immigrant. He didn't have a passport and couldn't risk applying for one because it would reveal his true identity and potentially get him deported. So rather than admit this to Elvis, rather than let Elvis tour Europe, Asia, South America, places where he could have been massive, Parker simply made up excuses. The money's not right. The venues aren't secure enough. American fans want you here. And Elvis, trusting Parker, believed him. Meanwhile, the Beatles were conquering the world, playing Shea Stadium and the Budokan, becoming a truly global phenomenon. Elvis could have had that, should have had that. But Parker's secret stole it from him. Parker also systematically isolated Elvis from anyone who might challenge his authority. If a band member, a friend, or a business associate started asking questions about the financial arrangements, suggesting Elvis should get a second opinion or hire an independent accountant, Parker would find a way to push them out. He'd tell Elvis they were jealous or greedy or trying to cause trouble. And Elvis, who was deeply loyal and hated confrontation, would let them go rather than deal with the drama. By the mid-1960s, Elvis was trapped. He was one of the most famous people on the planet, making enormous amounts of money, living in a mansion, surrounded by luxury. But he wasn't happy. He wasn't fulfilled. He felt like a puppet, going through the motions, performing in movies he hated, recording songs chosen by a committee, unable to make any real decisions about his own career. And when he'd try to talk to Parker about it, try to express his frustrations and his desire for something more, Parker would deploy his most effective weapon: guilt. Elvis, do you know how hard I work for you? The deals I've made? The opportunities I've created? I've made you the biggest star in the world. Everything you have, Graceland, the cars, the ability to support your parents, all of it came from my hard work. And now you want to throw that away to chase some artistic dream? To make serious movies that nobody will pay to see? That's selfish, Elvis. That's ungrateful. And Elvis, who'd been raised to be polite, to be grateful, to never rock the boat, would back down. He'd apologize. He'd go back to making the mindless movies and recording the formulaic songs. Because maybe Parker was right. Maybe he was being ungrateful. Maybe this was just how the business worked. You won't believe this, but the worst part of the Parker deal wasn't even the money or the control. It was the lost potential. The career Elvis could have had if he'd been managed by someone who actually cared about him as an artist. Imagine if Elvis had been allowed to tour internationally in his prime. Imagine sold-out shows in London, Paris, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro. Imagine the cultural impact, the musical collaborations, the growth as a performer. All of that was stolen from him because Parker was hiding his immigration status. Imagine if Elvis had been allowed to take serious acting roles. There were offers, real offers, to work with directors like Elia Kazan and Sidney Lumet, to star in films like West Side Story or A Star is Born. Elvis could have been the next James Dean. Instead, he made Girl Happy and Clambake and 30 other interchangeable movies that even Elvis himself couldn't tell apart by the end. Imagine if Elvis had been given artistic control over his music in the 1960s, while the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were experimenting, evolving, taking risks. Elvis was stuck recording soundtrack albums full of forgettable songs. He wanted to do gospel albums, music that actually meant something to him, but Parker said they wouldn't sell. When Elvis finally got to record his gospel album, How Great Thou Art, in 1966, he won a Grammy for it. It was proof that he could succeed artistically when given the chance. But Parker quickly shut down any ideas of doing more gospel work. Not profitable enough. By the late 1960s, Elvis was in crisis. His movie career was dying. His music was irrelevant. He hadn't had a significant hit in years. Younger artists like the Beatles had completely eclipsed him. He was becoming a has-been, a nostalgia act, a punchline, and he was only 33 years old. That's when Parker made a move that looked like salvation, but was actually just another way to exploit. Elvis, the 1968 comeback special. The NBC television special, now known as the '68 comeback special, should have been Elvis's moment to reclaim his crown. And artistically it was. Elvis, performing in black leather, raw and powerful and connected to his music in a way he hadn't been in years, reminded the world why he'd been the king in the first place. It was a triumph. But behind the scenes, Parker was already planning the next phase of exploitation. He booked Elvis into a residency at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. 2 shows a night, 7 days a week, for months at a time. It was grueling, exhausting work that left Elvis physically and mentally drained. But it was incredibly profitable for Parker, who was taking his percentage of Elvis's salary plus separate fees for promotion and management. Vegas became Elvis's prison. Year after year, the same shows, the same venue, the same routine. Elvis tried to tour occasionally, but Parker made those tours as difficult and unrewarding as possible. Bad routing, inadequate support, high costs, so that Elvis would want to retreat back to Vegas, where Parker had complete control. And through all of this, Elvis was medicating. Pills to wake up, pills to sleep, pills to perform, pills to deal with the emptiness and frustration and trapped feeling that defined his life. The prescription drug addiction that would eventually kill him was, in many ways, a direct result of the prison Parker had built around him. In Elvis's final years, people begged him to fire Parker. His father Vernon, his girlfriend Linda Thompson, his friends, they all saw what Parker was doing, how he was bleeding Elvis dry while Elvis himself spiraled into addiction and decline. They showed Elvis documents proving Parker's excessive fees and questionable financial arrangements. They brought in lawyers and accountants who explained how Elvis could break the contract, how he could start over with honest management. But Elvis couldn't do it. The psychological hold Parker had over him was too strong. Parker had been there since the beginning, had made him a star, had promised Gladys he'd take care of her boy. To fire Parker felt like admitting failure, like betraying that 20-year-old kid who'd shaken hands in that office in 1955. So Elvis stayed trapped, even as the prison walls closed in, even as his health deteriorated, even as everyone around him watched him slowly die. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, but the autopsy revealed a pharmacy's worth of drugs in his system. Elvis hadn't just died. He'd been dying for years, slowly poisoned by the prescription medications he needed to cope with a life he couldn't control. When Elvis died, most people expected Colonel Parker to fade away, to retire on his substantial wealth and disappear into obscurity. But that's not what happened. Instead, Parker immediately started planning how to profit from Elvis's death. He negotiated deals to sell Elvis merchandise, to license Elvis's image, to produce documentaries and tribute albums. He fought Elvis's estate for control of the posthumous rights. He continued to take his percentage, yes, even after Elvis was dead, claiming he was still providing management services by protecting Elvis's legacy. It wasn't until years later, after Parker's own death in 1997, that the full scope of his exploitation became clear. Financial records revealed that Parker had indeed been taking far more than 50% through hidden fees and questionable accounting. Legal documents showed that he'd turned down opportunities that would have been great for Elvis, but not profitable enough for Parker. Correspondence revealed how he deliberately isolated Elvis, controlled his information, and manipulated him psychologically to maintain power. The deal Elvis signed in 1955 wasn't just a bad business arrangement. It was a trap, a cage built from contracts and guilt and manipulation, and Elvis never escaped it. He died in that cage, 42 years old, a prisoner of the agreement he'd made at 20. In his final years, Elvis sometimes talked about Parker in ways that revealed his understanding of what had happened. "Colonel's a genius," he'd say with a bitter laugh. "He made me a star. Of course, he made sure I could never be anything but a star. Couldn't be an actor. Couldn't be just a singer. Had to be Elvis Presley, the brand, the product. The cash machine. And the machine breaks down eventually, don't it? His friends and band members report that Elvis knew. He understood what Parker had done to him, how he'd been used and controlled and exploited. But he also felt powerless to change it. The psychological conditioning ran too deep. Parker had spent 22 years telling Elvis that he owed everything to him, that he'd be nothing without him, that any problems were Elvis's own fault for being ungrateful or unrealistic. And on some level, Elvis had internalized those messages. That's the tragedy of the Colonel Parker story. It's not just about money or missed opportunities. It's about the psychological prison that one human being can build around another when given enough power and enough time. It's about how exploitation can masquerade as care, how control can pretend to be guidance, how someone can systematically rob you of your autonomy while convincing you they're doing you a favor. The contract Elvis signed gave Parker 50% of his earnings. But what Parker actually took was 100% of Elvis's freedom. And that's worth far more than any amount of money. When Parker died in 1997 at the age of 87, he was reportedly worth about $1 million, nowhere near what he should have had given the fortune he'd made off Elvis. Where did all that money go? Gambling debts, mostly. Parker had a severe gambling addiction and spent millions at Las Vegas casinos. In a final twist of irony, the fortune he'd built by exploiting Elvis was largely pissed away at craps tables and slot machines. Today, Elvis Presley's estate is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Graceland is one of the most visited homes in America. Elvis's music continues to sell. His movies are still watched. His image is still iconic. But Elvis himself never got to enjoy that legacy. He died trapped, exploited, controlled, unable to escape the deal he'd made at 20 years old when he was desperate and hungry and naive. That's the night Elvis met Colonel Parker. But really, it's the story of what happens when ambition meets manipulation, when desperation meets exploitation, when a young artist trying to support his mama shakes hands with a carnival hustler who sees him as nothing more than a product to be sold, a resource to be extracted, a gold mine to be emptied. The saddest part? Elvis knew. By the end, he knew exactly what had happened. But knowing didn't set him free. Sometimes the cage is so well built that even when you can see the bars, you still can't find the door. And that's how the king of rock and roll became a prisoner in his own life. Not through force or violence, but through a handshake, a signature, and the slow, methodical construction of a prison disguised as a palace. Tell us in the comments, do you think Elvis could have escaped Colonel Parker if he'd tried? Is it ever worth giving up control of your career to someone else? Have you ever made a deal you regretted but felt trapped by? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and untold stories of Elvis Presley, the human side of legends, and the relationships that shaped and scarred them. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.